Hey everybody, and welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. We are a justice-minded, progressive Bible study, and I am Pastor Megan. I'm very sleepy because I spent 5 hours at San Francisco General last night with someone while they were being cared for, and to drive them home so they wouldn't have to take a cab. And I'm going on a plane tomorrow, or no, in about 2 hours to Mexico City after a very long journey across the world. So. Sleepy Pastor Megan today, but I've been drinking coffee, so that could be interesting. Sleepy plus ADHD overload. Every Sunday, I am the pastor here at Grace Lutheran, even during the week. I'm also their pastor. Our worship service is 10:30 a.m. every Sunday. You can come in person to the Sunset in San Francisco, or you can join us online where we have 20 to 50 or so that join us that way, or via the iTunes podcast if you just want the sermons. And yeah,
Hey
Pastor
folks,
Amanda, yeah.
I'm Pastor Amanda Zentz. I serve at Central Lutheran Church in Portland, Oregon. You can join us on Sundays at 10:15 a.m. We have adult education at 9 a.m. and would love to have you join us for any or all of our services, etc., etc. Great to have you here with us this week. For many congregations around the country this week, they might be recognizing what is called Reconciling in Christ Sunday. Reconciling Works is an organization that works with the ELCA, which is our denomination of Flavor O Lutheran, in creating intentionally welcoming spaces for all people, born out of particularly creating welcoming statements for those who are LGBTQIA. And so we have in our country right now, we have 500 RIC congregations. Grace Lutheran in San Francisco happens to be the 500th congregation. I learned this last week that we only have several thousand to go before we are all RIC congregations eventually, maybe someday. But this week is RIC Sunday that may be celebrated, and we will have right down here some resources for folks. Pastor Megan and I were excited to get to assist in the creation of some of these resources. Megan and I worked on the liturgical portion particularly, and I had a great time working with the other pastors talking about these texts that we're going to take a look at today. And there are options for interactive prayers. There's options for affirmations back and forth between the congregation and pastor. There's options for different offertory prayers and opening prayers and all sorts of different pieces, as well as some recommendations about Eucharistic prayer and pieces like that. You'll also find some great information about some saints that you may or may not know about in that resource that are particularly awesome for folks who are looking for maybe not mainstream saints, but saints who are those that have been outside of the mainstream culture. So take a look at that resource right down there. Be awesome if you would like to use any of it. Feel free to. That is why the resource was created by Reconciling Works, so that it might be used.
Yeah, and it's used this Sunday in particular in remembrance or in anniversary of the three pastors who were the first ones to get ordained, explicitly defying the rule that used to exist, that didn't allow gay and lesbian pastors to serve openly and have partners. And this is the 20th anniversary, 25th anniversary. I don't remember the right date because I'm sleepy Pastor Megan. But I'll put a link down here if you want to learn more about those extraordinary ordinations. I think I was number 16 of 18, so that's a legacy that I kind of fall from. And on my wall back here, you can't, let me see if I can get it to actually like come in focus. I'll take it off the wall and I'll show it to you. My ordination certificate isn't signed by an active bishop. It's actually a special ordination certificate because of the defiant way that I was ordained into the world, with four congregations calling me to serve the homeless in San Francisco, which I did for the last 12 years. It's a good time. Yay, that policy has changed. Woohoo!
Yay!
I'm also wearing a hoodie today, because there are still some states that are debating whether or not hoodies should be outlawed for people. In this comes, if you haven't been following it as a part of, you can, if you're a tween or a millennial, you can follow hashtag Black Lives Matter. The very public, not a trial for the murder of Trayvon Martin in Florida, where the justification for killing him was because he was wearing a hoodie and was black, and that was scary because he might be up to some crime in the area. There's been a lot of continued marching and protesting and non-violent. There's also been some violent protesting of not only police responses but political responses and the racism that continues in our country. There have been groups of pastors who, instead of wearing their white albs, which is traditional for Lutherans, have worn black or not worn albs and worn black hoodies when they are worshiping as a sign of solidarity with this movement. It usually coincides, if they are someone who is not black themselves, with bringing someone who is able to speak for themselves, rather than it being a movement led by people who aren't directly affected by the issue, who are just speaking on behalf of other people. So I'll put a link to I want to link you to Black voices who are speaking for themselves, rather than try to be like, look how great I am because I'm a part of their movement. But just to think about the ways that people are gentrified, you can link this and know that there are still places where it is on the books that it is okay to kill LGBTQ people because they are scary in some sort of way. Here in San Francisco, there was a very famous murder of Harvey Milk and Mayor Moscone, and the person who did it, former supervisor Dan White, got off on a very light sentence because he said he had too many Twinkies, and it exacerbated his hatred of gay people, and was able to kind of get off because this rationalized fear of the other is an acceptable reason. You might also see similar sentiments in people who think that it's rational and okay to kill someone because they are Israeli, or because they are Jewish, or because they have a headscarf or are Muslim. All of these come from unacceptable places of feeling like there are humans that it is okay to dispose of. And as Lutherans, we believe that request from God that you shouldn't kill is one that is very, very true. Even Dietrich Bonhoeffer, when he was trying to kill someone who most people probably would maybe agree with him it was a good idea on assassinating Adolf Hitler, still wrestled very deeply with the fact that that even if God was calling him to do this for the sake of a better world, that it was still an unjust thing that God was calling him to do. And so in our Lutheranness, we think you can be both a sinner and a saint at the same time. So because God doesn't keep points and decide who gets to go to the good special line based on how many points they have, and people don't get sent to a yucky place because of points. We believe that God does the reconciling, and our ability then is to be grateful and then to help other people in the world in response, but nothing we do makes that happen faster or better or brighter or smarter or with 40% more stain fighting. Or any of those other kinds of things. And this is actually a really good segue to Jonah, because you might be thinking, Pastor Megan, you're on a high horse, but this is not really very much Bible study. And all you have to do is listen to a speech by Martin Luther King Jr. where he infuses every sentence with some sort of reference to the book of Isaiah or the book of Psalms to figure that out. But I also think this text from Jonah this week is an amazing one to be able to talk about justice issues. Jonah's super short. When we looked it up yesterday in Bible study, it was the front of a page and the back of a page. That's how big Jonah is, because it's only 4 chapters long, and they're super short chapters. And the gist of the story is that God comes to Jonah and says, Jonah, you need to tell the Ninevites how horribly stupid and bad, and how I'm going to, mangle them in all the worst ways, and there's no way they can ever get out of it. So go tell them that message. That'll be fun. And Jonah's like, that does not sound fun. Right, this is the
Well,
Pastor Megan version.
well, and
Jonah.
it should be explained.
All
I'm gonna
right.
pause. It should be explained that the Ninevites and the people that Jonah belongs to had a really, really contentious and bad relationship. That it was historically a physically combative relationship and a relationship of occupation and death and negativity. So Jonah is being asked to go tell a correlation that was made yesterday in my text study was if someone were to go to ISIS and talk to ISIS right now. And so understanding that this is not just a go to people you kind of don't get along with sort of thing, but Jonah's being told to go to people who have actively killed your country people and tell them to knock it off.
Yeah, but if you want the like best, most amazingest, haha, I'm right and you're wrong moment, it's when the voice of God speaks to you and says, you get to tell all the people who are jerk faces that I'm on your side, and you know that God's going to be with you and for you through that whole thing. But Jonah's like, nah.
Because Jonah knows, and this is a wonderful line in the book of Jonah, Jonah knows that God's love is steadfast and that God's love would be able to forgive them. And Jonah's like, no, I don't want to go tell them this because you're going to forgive them, and I'm not down with that. Forget it. Screw that. I'm not doing it.
I disagree with you. I think Jonah doesn't want to tell them because Jonah thinks God's love is steadfast for him. And Jonah thinks he doesn't have to do what God says and God will still love him, which is true but stupid. So stupid that God swallows him with a whale. Right?
I think it's a both and.
Whatever.
I think it could be a both and. And yes.
Don't listen to her.
But again, the cool part is in this story is that every time, like Jonah's the insider, but everybody on the outside is the one who gets it. So Jonah tries to get away from this call by getting on a boat and sailing like the opposite direction. Like if he was in Ohio and he was being called to San Francisco, like he got on a boat to go to England. Opposite direction, wrong ocean, right? And so they're on the boat and it starts storming and Jonah's like, oh, don't know what this is about. Staying snuggled down here. You don't see me.
And then Jonah gets swallowed by a sea monster, which current Bibles call a whale because we think that's probably what it was and that it's more believable than a sea monster because we don't believe in those anymore unless you watch Destination Truth. And then the really cool thing happens.
But the people...
This is the best thing ever that has never, ever, ever been shown in stained glass windows, and it should be, but my congregation said I'm not allowed after they said that I should do it. This is not fair.
But the people...
Jonah gets vomited out of the whale.
He does.
A dude gets vomited out of a whale in the Bible. Look it up.
Yes.
All right, what do you have to say, Amanda?
What I had to say was that it was the people on the boat who recognized that the storm was because Jonah was doing something stupid. It wasn't Jonah who realized he was doing something stupid. It was the people on the boat who were the outsiders, and they were the ones who threw him overboard. He walked the plank. Then he got swallowed by the whale, and then he got barfed up. And where did he get barfed up?
Stupid places. Where'd he get barfed up, Amanda?
He got barfed up in Nineveh, where he was
Of
trying
course
to
he got
avoid
barfed
going.
in Nineveh. Because God's mean like that. And when you're like, I don't want to be a pastor, God's like, haha, you're going to be a pastor, even though there's these unjust rules in the world, and you're going to have to do it in a stupid way, not to conflate the story into my story. But that's what we do. So then Jonah goes to Nineveh, and he does the stupid mission, and then God makes him a liar. Because of an amazingly motivated king. He might have been a jerk before that and killed everybody, but the part that is excluded from what you're supposed to read on Sunday but will appear in the reading at Grace Lutheran, because it's the most important part, is the king goes, even though God's not going to forgive us, let's try anyway. Even though God's not going to forgive us, let's try anyway. Let's, like, get our act in order, which is the opposite of what a lot of people do. God's paying attention, so let's try because God's paying attention. And shows what Jesus talks about when he talks about for those who have much to be forgiven, they are much more grateful than those who don't have much to be forgiven. And so they put everything into it, like every little bit of them into it. And God changes God's mind, which is awesome if you think it's awesome for God to change God's mind when stupid people tell you God says this and that means you're horrible, because God has the potential to be in relationship with us and to have that kind of steadfast love that Pastor Amanda thinks Jonah knew was going to happen anyway. But if I was Jonah, which I've been before, if I was Jonah and God said, go tell everybody this, or else, and then I was like, no way. And then I did it, and then God made me a liar. Because the only cool part of the task was that you were right, and God was on your side, right? It's the na-na-na-na-na moment to all the people who were jerks to you. And then God changes God's mind, and so what does Jonah do? He does what we do when we don't get our way. He sulks, climbs to the top of a mountain, and is like, well, fine, I'm just going to die here in the sun. And God, who previously in the Old Testament text would have been like, fine, I shall kill you with daggers and boulders and rocks and lava and sulfur and
smiting,
grows a tree to make shade for Jonah, and then God changes God's mind again and is like, you're such a whiny little Jonah. He doesn't say this, but this is the Pastor Megan version. And then brings a worm to infest the tree to no longer provide Jonah with protection, because the story, even though the story ends at chapter 4, continues again and again and again and again, where God gives us an uncomfortable task, we refuse it, we're vomited out of whatever horribleness we find ourselves in, we go do the task, God's forgiveness is way bigger than we expect, and then we're like, oh, I'm so tired and exhausted and I don't want to do that again. And then it's time to go do that again.
I'm writing down a note.
Is it about whale vomit?
No, it's about a worm.
A worm. Yeah, there's a worm. And it's awesome. So, there you have it. That's what's up. This is a great book, and I think you can sum up. I feel like the rest of the Bible is summed up in these 4 short chapters. God's grace is bigger than us. And when we don't listen to God, the whole world is on God's side, right? If you've ever had something serendipitously happen, you're kind of on par with this. If you've ever received grace upon grace more than expected, you're on par with this. Of course, you have to ignore the fact that in bad moments, when bad things happen to you and they're not explained and God doesn't show up with the bush, just ignore those moments, and then everything else in the world is explained by this book of Jonah.
I would like to put another twist on this.
No, you're not allowed.
Too bad.
I'm trying to have us be as cantankerous today as when rabbis talk about the scriptures. I think we're getting close. This is as close as we've gotten to a Bible throwdown, people.
It is. Boom. Here's my version, yo.
Jonah.
So Jonah, the one thing that I like to talk about whenever we talk about prophets is that our culture has taken the word prophet and made it be into like a future teller, like somebody who can view the future and like says what's coming in the future because they've had a vision. And my understanding of what an Old Testament prophet is that this is somebody who tells the truth. This is a truth teller. So this is someone who you can see the patterns of a culture or the patterns of a process, and you can tell the truth about it, even though it might be the really hard truth, the really icky truth that we don't want to hear or want to know. So, for example, you can look at how what we are doing in our world environmentally, the use of fossil fuels and all of those kinds of pieces and not caring for things is causing irreparable environmental damage that is going to have real repercussions on how our world functions ecologically in the next 100 years. And and you can see that truth, and then you speak that truth even though it pisses people off and they hate you for saying it and they want to send you nasty anonymous letters telling you that you're a stupid face. So you're going to
Been there.
say that truth anyway because this is what needs to be said. So you go into the world and you say, hey, world, here's the situation. Stop your behavior or the world is going to end. We're not going to be able to eat fish out of our ocean because we've so polluted it that we can't have it. So enjoy your sushi now, but don't teach your kids to like it because they're never going to be able to eat it.
That's really sad.
Right? Right? Sushi's
Good thing
a
I had
favorite.
some yesterday during Bible study.
Yeah, good thing I had some yesterday.
Yay!
So, but truly to speak these truths and to proclaim these truths, and prophets are usually not very well received because who likes to hear if you don't clean your room, you're going to damage the property and have to pay more, so clean your room. You don't want to hear people say clean your room. You just forget it. I don't want to clean my room. My room's fine.
My wife Laurel really likes to clean. When I go to Mexico tonight, she said, I said, what are you going to do while I'm gone? And she mimed double-fisted vacuuming. She was like really excited. So some people do like to clean, and that's okay. God loves you too. But it's
God,
weird.
absolutely. It's not weird. It's a call and a gift that
Super
not
weird.
everybody has. Part of the body. But the deal with this is that Jonah is a truth teller, right? And Jonah is not like seeing a vision of this city being destroyed. Jonah is, in how I experience prophets, you see the pattern. God opens your eyes to the pattern and you speak it to people in warning. So a piece that I'm really captured by in the reading for today, which will of course be down here, is that the city is so large it would take 3 days to walk across it. That's a pretty big city. I mean, really, if you think about it, that's a pretty large city if it's going to take 3 days of walking to get all the way across the city. And Jonah, it doesn't really have his heart in telling this, right? So I totally imagine Jonah, like, he only goes a third of the way into the city. He only goes like 1 day's walk. And I imagine him kind of dragging his feet and maybe not even making it a full third into the way of the city.
Or maybe he walked really fast so it would be over.
Who knows? One way or the other. I just kind of, with the way that he sulks, I just don't see him, and the way that he's napping in sleeping through the storm on the boat. I just
don't know.
see him
When I
at
sulk,
that-
I don't climb a mountain first. That's all I'm saying.
a hill. He's on the hillside. He's on the
Yeah, but-
hill overlooking the city.
But in that part, a lake is a sea. I'm just saying.
Okay,
I've seen the hills. They're really
semantics. I'm just saying.
big. Really big.
I could just see him dragging his feet. No matter what, he only gets a third of the way into the city, and he stands there. And I can imagine him being like, "Hey, everybody, change your ways. Or everyone's gonna go."
Like a depressed teenager. You could
Like,
actually read this
go
whole story
ahead.
as a depressed teenager, and it would work.
Totally. Like, go ahead, change what you're doing or something, and God'll forgive you. But otherwise, everybody's gonna die.
Ah.
Right. And the amazing part of it is that the people actually listen. The people hear him. And it's a story, in some ways we could say that it's a story to like for tired prophets, for people who are speaking the truth in love, for tired prophets to hear this, like, don't give up. Maybe somebody will actually hear and will actually change their ways. Like, even if you're really tired and you don't feel like saying the truth anymore, keep saying it, because if somebody hears and the right person hears, and the word got all the way to the king, and the king, like Pastor Megan said, I'm going to agree with you on this one.
What?
Like Pastor Megan said, the king says, even though God probably isn't going to take this anyway, but let's all do it. Sackcloth, ashes, everybody. Let's get into mourning. Let's change our ways. Let's do this. Go team. And everybody actually does it. Wouldn't it be awesome if we spoke the truth and we said, hey, treating people of color like crap hurts our world and hurts us. It hurts everything. So knock it off. Stop being stupid to people of color. And everybody was like, oh my gosh.
That's amazing.
Right.
Let's
and
do it.
Like, that suddenly systemic racism disappeared overnight and the entire regime was toppled and people stopped getting killed in the streets because of a pigmentation difference in their skin. Like, how awesome would that be? So there is some hope for prophets who are tired and want to go sulk on hills to hear that even if you don't want it to happen, maybe it actually will happen someday.
For the record, I'm not going to a hill. I'm going to a volcano.
Well, be careful of becoming overly emotionally attached to any trees that you see while you're there.
Well, I was also going to say something, but then I forgot what it was because I'm really tired. Oh,
because
I remembered what it was. So, you remember how last night there was this speech thing?
Yes, there was.
I think it's called the State of the Union. So,
like
I think this would be the equivalent. Now, I'm not saying Obama is an evil king in charge of a horribly violent place. But can you imagine how shocked we'd be if Obama gave a speech and then we did the stuff in the speech? Like, any of it? Like, we don't even expect any of it. Like, the Republicans, before they even heard the speech, already had another speech that said, we ain't doing nothing in the speech. So this would be the equivalent of someone, a politician, giving a speech and then going, y'all are going to do this. As a king, the king probably had more power to, like, make people do stuff or else. But I don't think if you're changing from your evil, violent ways that probably goes very well in the whole make God change God's mind plan. So that's not even an evil, horrible regime, depending upon your perspective. Maybe if you're a Republican.
But I think,
I don't know.
To be
it's
fair,
still not
we
the
have
same.
to be fair that when a Republican president does the State of the Union, the Democrats have the same speech lined up. I mean,
Yeah.
our policy,
That's what
our
I'm saying.
world is so divided. We are so we're not just picking on Republicans here. We're saying that right in our country right now, we are so politically divided that we can't even consider listening to the person who's been elected by the majority and say, hey, let's do this stuff together. We're already saying, hey, we're not going to do this stuff together and screw you, stupid head. Like, we're already lined up against each other.
Well, yeah, so I'm saying it's
yes.
If it's that hard for us, a supposedly democratic, fair, awesome, freedom-loving place, to follow the speech of someone who's like, let's change our ways and end poverty and racism and LGBT badness. Like, not that LGBT is badness, but the badness to LGBT
badness
folks.
To LGBTQI.
Right? Let's fix our economy so it's fair and just and all that business. Which sounds familiar. But we never ever in a million years think that would happen. So what went on that a king said, let's do all that, and then people actually did? That's all I'm saying.
It's awesome.
Joan is amazing. It's amazing.
It's a great book, and there are lots of cool story versions of it.
Okay, we have to move on, though, because all of these texts are awesome except for Corinthians, which is stupid. But we'll get there.
You have a plane to catch.
Yeah, that too. So, Psalm 62. There's some awesome stuff. The part about the lowest state who are out of breath and the highest state are a delusion in the balance that they go up. Like, that sounds pretty relevant. Just saying. And I really like verse 8. Trust God at all times and pour out your heart before God who is a refuge for us. Love it. God protects us. Yay. Blah, blah. God's a fortress. Mighty fortress is our God. La la la. We have copyright permission for Oxford Fortress songs. Do 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 do. Lutheran. There you go. Okay, so that's Psalm 62. Anything else you want to add?
How's this? I've already drank one of these today, so why don't you start talking about the really horrible Corinthians, and I'll just be right back.
Yeah.
It's not as horrible as last week's
Corinthians. It's not as horrible as last week.
Last week was
about prostitutes. The thing you need to know about Corinthians is that Paul is writing a letter to a specific group of people, and if he's saying that they're doing bad things in the world, that means that this group of people was doing all the things he says are bad. And needed to be talked out of it enough to have a letter from him. this is one of those times when I wish Paul would have left his opinions to himself. It has led to some yucky things in history. It comes out of the Greek mentality that feelings are bad and knowledge is good. This has been a part of the long line trickle of being mad at people who are female-bodied, and thinking that women aren't rational thinkers or aren't smart enough because they think about their bodies. That's hooey and stupid. But what we can take out of this text is this desire to be in relationship with each other, an example of someone who's speaking a hard truth, and maybe it gives us the heebie-jeebies. It's an interesting thing that Paul gives me the heebie-jeebies, but Jonah does not. And so maybe that's my own personal baggage against Paul. I think Paul's been used in a lot of stupid ways to injure people, whether it's clobbering or trying to repair people who aren't necessarily broken. Paul says some wonderful things, but you have to kind of know that in the book of Corinthians and in Romans and in some of these texts, at the end of the text is when he comes back to the place where he's like, yes, and everyone is saved, and we don't have to follow these rules anymore. So, ignore the rest of my millions of parts of this letter. So, yeah, that's that. The whole being mad at women, being mad at feelings, and just reading certain parts of Paul that don't get to the grace part is stupid. Moving on.
Are we not going to say to... Can I just say about last week's reading?
How do I stop you?
You can't. You could actually mute me. You have the controls.
Ooh.
But magic controlly hands. But what I want to say about last week's reading, and as something to say on this side, is that your coffee is missing.
Yeah, where is it?
Go find your coffee. I'll talk about Bible translations.
No. Oh, I finished it. That's what happened to it. Sad face.
Sad face. Bible translations. When you get a reading that is really hard to understand and it doesn't make a lot of sense in the book that you're reading, try another translation. Because remember, we're not actually reading in the Greek. And last I knew, the fluent speakers of Koine Greek kind of aren't around anymore. So there's lots of people who might be fluent readers, but they are not part of the culture and the society where they would be able to really understand the language in the same way as the writers. Yes.
And the original text didn't have commas or periods, so we don't really know how it goes together, or capital letters.
Right.
Paul probably still is being a jerk with his list, though.
Yes. But because of all the cultural and all that kind of stuff, sometimes it's helpful to look at a multitude of translations. Last week's text, when I was getting ready to read it from the pulpit, because we had Anita Hill as a guest preacher, and she is Reverend Anita Hill, different one than maybe the lawyer, but the Pastor Anita Hill, who works for Reconciling Works, was here this week and preached and did an awesome and amazing job of preaching MLK weekend. And I had to get up and I had to read because our lecturer was sick. And so I read the scripture and I read the Corinthians, and it was really awful, and I didn't want to say fornication, 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 fornication like 15 times in last week.
Prostitutes.
The prostitutes I don't mind saying, right? But fornication it's just such a word that we don't actually understand context.
You should have changed it to whoopee. So, that would have been funny.
No, I read Eugene Peterson's The Message translation.
Oh, barf.
And
I know
actually,
you like it, but barf.
I do like it, and it was actually a lot easier to find a way to relate to that text in some ways sort of kind of towards the way in which Paul meant it to that culture and that time, because it wasn't as blocking, the language wasn't as blocking to understand perhaps the kind of context in which Paul was trying to write it. So you can see up here that there are a multitude. Those are all different Bible translations right there. You can get lots and lots and lots of different ones, and there are resources that will let you get a whole bunch of them without having to buy a whole bunch of books. And perhaps we can link up BibleGateway.com right down here, where you can put in your passage, and then you can find it in hundreds of different translations, whether it be English or Portuguese or Spanish or French or Italian or whatever you want, and understand that if there are this many translations in English, that there are probably that many translations in many other languages too, all with their own bent and theological spin. So don't be afraid to look at a multitude of translations if you're having a hard time understanding things like 1 Corinthians chapters 6 and 7, which can be really weird to deal with.
Yeah,
so there. Now we're really done with that section because I'm done with that section.
Mark, back to Mark, because Mark is awesome.
Mark!
We love Mark.
Hey, Mark!
So, in the plug of Megan's Journeys Around the World of the day, a couple weeks ago when I was at the Sea of Galilee,
like you do,
I was in Capernaum, and the place. So, Gospel of Mark. Let me just start here. Goes very quickly. The word immediately happens over and over and over and over and over again. The word immediately in Greek is a short word. The word immediately in English is a long word. It makes no sense. But it means bang, 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 bang. Jesus got from one place to another. So if you are in Capernaum, there is a synagogue, which is known as the Synagogue of Jesus. It's believed to be the place where he was a rabbi and the place where he healed people, like the man with the withering hand. And literally one house away from the synagogue is the house of Simon Peter's mother-in-law. And so if you follow the progression of the Gospel of Mark, he's baptized, he goes out into the desert to hide because bad things are happening to John the Baptist. John the Baptist is arrested and taken away, and so if you're wondering, if Jesus was so fancy, why don't they take him away when John the Baptist gets taken away? It's partially because he hasn't done all of his stuff yet, and partially because he hid in the desert, maybe being tested by the devil and being fed by angels, but basically he lied low during the time when bad stuff was happening, which is why this text starts with, now, after John was arrested, Jesus came back to Galilee. So what happens is he's proclaiming the good news. He heals Simon Peter's mother, and he goes to the sea, and he when I was imagining this text, I was imagining it the way I saw it in coloring books, and in the way that I saw it in my brain, which I imagined the big ocean, and you can't see anything on the other side because it's a huge ocean, and that when he goes to the sea, they're in these huge, huge boats, and they have to jump out and swim to the shore because they're so far out there. And what is really the case is that along the Sea of Galilee, the docks are really, really small. You have to think like the dock on a lake, because the Sea of Galilee is actually a lake, where you can just push one boat out at a time, basically, and you would go fishing, but you wouldn't have to go fishing like super, super deep to put your nets out. Think of it as a much smaller sphere. So if it is one house away from Simon Peter's mother-in-law's house from the synagogue, it's maybe one more house away to this harbor and to where the people would be out in the fishing boat. So it's not as big of a crazy, weird, stranger danger story as I had imagined. So I imagined some guy on the shore being like, "Hey, you, come follow me," to these big fancy fishing boats, and then they jump out of the boat and they leave their dad in the boat, and it's like this big to-do, and Jesus must have been super special or super shiny bright, like super amazing. But in this teeny tiny town, this one dock town, Jesus goes, he doesn't probably even have to shout very loud, and says, "Hey, come see what I'm up to at the synagogue, 2 houses away," right? And then as he's walking the maybe 20 feet on the beach, there's probably 2 dudes mending their nets. And he's like, "Hey, you want to come too?" And they're like, "Okay," because there's not as much to risk as there was in my brain to walk 2 houses to the synagogue to hear this dude out. Now, they make a bigger life commitment, right, because they end up traveling all over the place with him after this. But if you imagine that it's the local pastor talking to the people who live a couple houses away, like, "Hey, do you want to come do this thing with me?" for me, it's a lot more realistic to have this story of people following to see what Jesus is up to. It takes out some of the questions that I used to have, like, why'd they abandon their dad? Like, it's such a tiny town. You could go listen to the dude and be back to your dad within 20 minutes if you really needed to, right? So that for me reshapes this. It puts the story on a much smaller scale, and it makes it really clear why everything can happen immediately. It'd be like, and then Jesus walked next door and he healed some people, and then he walked next door and he found some dudes in a boat, and then he walked next door and he went back to the synagogue and he did a sermon, right? So think of it as a teeny tiny little small town, and it's a lot easier for things to happen quickly. And that for me makes more sense and takes out a lot of the like nagging questions I had, like, really they followed him? I don't know about that, right? So that's just my little setup context for what's going on here. I'm going to let Pastor Amanda talk before I go to crazy town. Go ahead.
Well, the only other thing I think I would add to that, because that's actually really cool information that I didn't know, so thank you for sharing. It's a great use of your continuing education to give.
And good use of my Gomer Pyle impression, too.
Great use of that. That was fantastic.
Yeah,
but the one thing I like to lift up whenever this section of the Gospel of Mark is read, because we're still in chapter 1, is that these are the first words that Jesus says in this Gospel. So if you have a red letter edition of the Scripture, which puts the words that Jesus says in red text instead of black text, you'll see that in the Gospel of Mark, this is the first red text that comes up. And so each gospel, I think it's really interesting, and maybe it's because a professor that I highly respect thinks it's interesting. Dr. Smith pointed out to us whenever there was the first words of Jesus in a gospel, because it kind of sets up who Jesus is in that gospel and maybe what kind of a little bit of the message might be from Jesus in that gospel. And so here in this week's reading are the first words of Mark in this gospel, and it's a really clear, the kingdom of God is here. Like, this is it's happening, and pay attention to this, and things are going to change. So if we want to say the redeeming thing that you can pull out of the Corinthians passage is that the old things are passing away, the world is changing, everything is different, everything is going to be different. You can pull that out of that Corinthians passage, that everything that you know is going to go away and things are going to be different than they used to be. And when you're living at the crumbling of an empire, such as the time in when Jesus and Paul were living, when the Roman Empire was beginning to crumble and fall to pieces, and there was going to be a lot more of those kind of growing pains and crumbling of empire in the next 100 years, you can see the signs of.
I saw the sign and I opened up my mind. Shh. I have the rights to that too, so I just figured.
Oh, okay. Okay, you do. Okay. Well, you have it. But be careful. It's like 30 seconds at a whack, right? Something like that.
No, I own the whole song. As long as we sing it and don't play it.
There we go. So the thing I was saying about this stuff, the crumbling of the empire, things are changing, and so you get Jesus coming in, and the first words of Jesus in this bang bang, everything happens super duper fast in the Gospel of Mark stuff is the kingdom of God is near, and pay attention, and then goes about gathering up people to follow. And even though it may not have been really risky to go listen to the guy next door, eventually what Jesus is calling people to is super duper risky and super duper costly.
All these dudes get murdered.
They don't know that yet.
In about 16 chapters.
They what?
They all get murdered in about 16 chapters later.
Yeah, but in the meantime, this is just the start of their story. It's just like, come check it out, and so you never know when God is calling you what the real cost is going to be. And even if it feels like a weird cost at the beginning, like leaving your nets and your family and all that kind of stuff, there might be some other really big costs along the way too. and it could be that the whole world is going to change because of it, and regimes are going to topple, and kingdoms are going to fall, and that kind of thing. I mean, I'm just saying that maybe that might have been a bit of the message.
I was also going to add in there that in my travels to the places where early Christianity kind of first started
Lord walk with
revealing
you.
revealing itself like in writing, right? Because Paul's writing is older than Mark's
Gospels.
writing, so that sucks because I dislike the Paul reading more than the Mark reading. But if you look at the really old-timey art that was within that same period of Paul's writing, every single piece of art that I saw, they might have been back and forth about how dark the skin of Jesus was, right, in their artwork, but every single piece of art that I saw, Mark was dark-skinned. Every single piece of art. Other gospel writers, very light-skinned, all the way even up to St. Peter's Basilica. Mark, dark-skinned every single time. So if your congregation gets frustrated that you're talking about Black Lives Matter, or they think you're just being political and thinking about something that is hip, a hip hashtag, remember that we are in the year of Mark. We are in the year of listening to dark-skinned voices. Our gospel writer is a dark-skinned voice from the oldest accountings of what Mark maybe perhaps looked like, or what people thought Mark looked like. And so maybe pair that with some listening to people whose skin is darker than your own, of whatever variety your skin color is, to hear about voices. For example, the country gave worldwide attention for the 10 to 20 people who were killed in the Charlie Hebdo attacks, and I know it was scary because I was in Europe when those attacks happened, and everyone was nervous that they were going to be in an attack that was similar. And yet at the same time, 2,000 people were massacred in Africa, and it got virtually zero media attention. And so we definitely need to keep thinking about ways that what we're listening to is giving us a filtered story, and the ways that we can support people who need their voice heard. And are dwelling in this Gospel of Mark for a year is one of the ways that we can do that, and we ought to pair that with contemporary ways that we can continue that listening. This last weekend, the ELCA, World Hunger Program, sent individuals from every synod to San Francisco to talk about how we can address local domestic poverty issues within the blocks around our churches. And they sent those participants in groups to different San Francisco congregations, where they were assigned to walk for 2 hours and just observe the neighborhoods to see the places we as Lutherans can make a difference in the few blocks that are around our churches. And even in our neighborhood here in the Sunset, where it doesn't seem like there's much poverty aside from the homeless people living in Golden Gate Park or the people who are living on the beach, they found lots of things to pay attention to and lots of ways that we can focus our attention domestically. The National Lutheran Church, the ELCA division, spends 70% of its poverty money in other parts of the world, in part because we are way better. Our poverty is way better off than the poverty in other spaces. And as we are paying attention to what we're paying attention to, retraining ourselves over and over and over and over again to listen to the voices next door or listen to the voices on the next block is really important to us. And sometimes those issues come closer to home when the school shooting is the one next to your church. And when the person who's experiencing discrimination lives in your home or is related to you in some sort of way. And that listening then can reinvigorate us to support the work that needs to happen the rest of the way around the world. And so I just want to encourage you, take a walk maybe, and pay attention. Take some intentional time to listen to the stories and the narrative in first person, if you can, of people whose skin tones are darker shades than yours. Maybe Boehner counts. I don't know. That's a suntan joke.
Yeah, I'm going to invite anyone who's in the Portland metro area that if you would like an opportunity to do this, and you are around on Friday afternoons and are available between 5 and 6:30, 7 o'clock, that you can join me with Connected at Holiday Park and the Lloyd Center in downtown Portland. It's an amazing ministry that may be shifting its focus out towards the Gresham area at some point in the future because of the work that needs to be done out in that area. It is a ministry that is a 501c3. It's 3 years old, and the people who participate in it are inspiring and are amazing and are actively opening my eyes and opening my heart to learn more about what it means to be an ally and an advocate. I have done this kind of work for some years, somewhat with the LGBTQIA community, but I have not done this kind of work with people of color. And so this is a new journey for myself as well. And the people of Connected are teaching me how to do this in authentic ways. So I will make sure that, Megan, that we have the link for Connected down here. And also for those of you who are in the Metro Portland area, there's an event coming up on February 15th. It's the Empower the Dream event, and Dr. Bernice King, who is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s youngest daughter, is going to be speaking at First Vancouver Baptist Church here in Portland. There are still tickets for sale if you would like to come and hear. I think that the gospel music is going to be outstanding and the choir is going to be absolutely incredible, and I'm just going to sit there and weep the entire time through the music, and I'm probably going to weep the entire time through hearing Dr. King speak. If you would like to come and join at that event, tickets are still for sale, so I'll put information down. I think I may have already linked it up a couple of times, but I'll put it down here again. Because I think it is, if you are within driving distance, and this year, every year it matters, I think this year there is a breaking open of conversations around these kinds of topics, and I think that this is going to be an absolutely outstanding, powerful, and amazing event. So I strongly encourage you to come and join. And this is the Connected business card, and it's all about, I don't know if that's going to come through because it's awfully bright in here.
Oh yeah, I can read it.
Can you read it? But
make your screen bigger if you can't read it.
There you go. And so the mission of this group is to basically spend time in the places where there are youth at risk, being a presence and talking with people and being there to help maybe show some leadership and some guidance, so that things are easier and better for these kinds of kids that are growing up in a world where their voices don't matter and where they are told that their lives don't matter. And so this is an active way to be involved that doesn't involve a lot of risk on your part, in the sense of all you got to do is just come and walk and come in, and you don't even have to talk.
Or roll.
Or roll. Absolutely. Walk or roll. Just come and be a part of it. So you're invited and welcome. And yeah.
I also wanted to say, lest anyone ever get the impression that Pastor Amanda or I think that we have figured out these issues, or that we're experts on these issues, or that the ELCA has all the answers on these issues, know that the most depressing sign of failure that happens at every synod assembly, which is like the meeting of lots of pastors in an area, or church-wide assemblies, is at the beginning of each meeting, because we know we suck at being a diverse church and we haven't put the effort into it we ought, or the money, or the privilege aside that we need to. we have decided that we would intentionally suffer for the reading of our failure on this issue. And so at the beginning of every meeting we read off the diversity percentages, and they're so woeful that if you look around the room, people will be like putting their head on the table, and it reminds us again and again and again. And despite that, I think this has been like a decade probably that we've been reading these numbers. We still continue to not put the resources into it, not put the work into it, and to not be that much higher up in our diversity figures. This is not something that is unique to the Lutheran Church. It's not something that we have been good at, and we need to be continually reminded and pastored about. And boo on us.
It's hard work. It's really hard work. It's not easy, and it's growing pains, and it's tough, and it can be awkward, and it's not easy. And I think that's one thing that I'm walking alongside right now, is that it's just not easy work, but it's really important.
And it's why these words from Jonah circle back around to us, that this evil, horrible, stupid king guy came up with, which is the true work of the church. And it's stupid to say that following the words of this evil king guy from the book of Jonah is probably more what we're up to than following the work of that Jesus guy who had a lot better ideas most of the time. But this idea, who knows? God may relent and change God's mind. He may turn from his fiercer anger so that we do not perish. Who knows? We might get a better reward than our results show. Who knows? We might be successful one day at finally ending homelessness. Who knows? We might be able to figure out this racism stuff and make a dent in it. Who knows? We might stop calling each other names and shooting each other. Who knows? We might stop passing stupid laws about hoodies. Who knows? There's a litany that happens during a Seder meal where the litany is to say,
Dayenu,
and how grateful you are for all the things that God has brought you. To say, it would have been enough if only God had brought us out of Egypt and saved us from slavery. It would have been enough if only God had sent a son to life, death, resurrection, blah, 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 baptism. It would have been enough if we had been gifted with Martin Luther King Jr. King, but had not seen all of the beautiful marching that has happened recently. It would have been enough if we were able to experience the beauty and the joy that comes from a beautiful baby being born into the world. And so we hold both of these things in our hand. We hold the, we got so much more to do, and the it would have been enough. God is so wonderful that we're able to do these things, and that's the same tension that the Psalms hold, and maybe why it's okay when the psalmist tells us, get your act together, because it's always followed with a, yay, God is great, or a, yay, God loves us despite our stupidity and dumb things that we do in the world. So don't get stuck in just one side or the other. Find joy to pair with your frustration at the slowness and stuckness of the world. Find the stuckness and slowness and stupidity of the world to take you out of too much celebration that ignores the suffering and sadness of others. So find your balance, and we'll see you next time. We love you, and thanks for joining us. Bible
Thanks,
study!
Bye.